The call came while I was still in uniform. "Ma'am, your stepfather is here. He has bolt cutters." For a moment the world went very quiet, not because I was afraid, but because I'd been waiting for this exact sentence. For years. I could picture him standing in front of that downtown storage unit, jaw-tight, hands shaking with entitlement, convinced that whatever my father left behind belonged to him now. He thought the lock was the last obstacle. He had no idea the lock was never the point. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tell the manager to stop him. I smiled, reached into my desk, and touched the one thing he would never find, the real key. I have never told my mother what my father left me in that storage unit downtown. Not when he was alive, not after he died, and definitely not after she remarried. Some people think secrets are born from guilt or fear. Mine wasn't. Mine came from instinct, the same kind of instinct that keeps you alive when you're serving overseas, when you learn to read a room before anyone else does, when you understand that silence sometimes is preparation. My father taught me that. He was the kind of man who believed in paperwork and backups, in plans that outlived emotions. When I was younger, I thought it was paranoia. Now I know it was love expressed quietly. He never raised his voice, never made dramatic speeches. He just prepared. When he died, there was grief, of course, the kind that sits heavy in your chest when you realize there are questions you'll never ask. But there was also a folder, and a key, and instructions written in my father's careful handwriting. "Do not rush. Do not explain. Keep this private." The storage unit sat in the center of the city, tucked between a nail salon and a shipping warehouse. 10 by 10, climate-controlled, unremarkable. My mother thought it held old furniture and tax papers. She once suggested cleaning it out to save money. I told her I'd handle it when I had leave. I never did. 2 years after my father passed, my mother met Robert. He introduced himself as charming but humble, a widower who understood loneliness. He brought flowers, fixed small things around the house, complimented my service in the military with a kind of performative respect that felt rehearsed. He said things like, "Your daughter's uniform must make you proud," while his eyes lingered a second too long on the house itself. I was stationed states away when they married. I attended the ceremony on a screen, standing in a quiet corner of the base, with my cover tucked under my arm, watching my mother smile in a way that looked hopeful but fragile. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself grief makes people suspicious. Then Robert asked about my father's assets. It was casual at first. A comment here, a question there. Did Dad leave a will? Were there any accounts still open? He asked my mother in front of me, once smiling like it was a joke, just making sure everything's squared away. That was when I knew. Because my father had taught me something else too. People who have nothing to gain don't count what isn't theirs. I didn't confront him. I didn't warn my mother. I didn't mention the storage unit, even when Robert started asking why my father had kept one downtown for so long. I smiled politely, answered vaguely, and went back to base with the weight of certainty settling into my bones. Robert wasn't curious, he was searching. From my bunk late at night, I replayed conversations. The way he asked questions in a specific order, the way he framed concern as responsibility, the way he spoke about family property even when he meant my father's. I began documenting, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted clarity. Dates, phrases, emails, text messages my mother forwarded without thinking, asking if I knew what Robert meant by liquidating unused assets. I kept it all, quietly, methodically. The storage unit became more than a secret, it became a test. I arranged with the facility manager, an older man named Thomas, who had worked there longer than I'd been alive, that only I could access the unit. No exceptions. I updated the file, added notes, added an extra lock, and then at my father's suggestion years earlier, I installed something else, something invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Robert never did. From the base, I received updates indirectly. My mother mentioning that Robert had helped organize paperwork, that he wanted to streamline finances, that he'd offered to drive downtown one afternoon to check the storage unit for me. I told her no. Firmly, calmly. That was the first crack. After that, his tone changed. He started calling me less daughter and more difficult, told my mother I was secretive, said my service had made me rigid. I wrote it all down. Still, I waited. Because my father had been clear the truth doesn't work unless it arrives on its own. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was back on base, fresh from drill sweat, still cooling beneath my uniform. Thomas's voice was tight when he spoke. "Ma'am, I didn't want to alarm you," he said, and that alone told me everything. "But your stepfather is here. He says the unit belongs to his wife now. He's got bolt cutters." I closed my eyes, not in fear but in recognition. This was it. I asked Thomas to do exactly what we'd discussed. Call security, notify local police, document everything, say nothing else. Then I sat down, unbuckled my duty belt, and pulled open the drawer in my desk. Inside was the key, not the spare, not the obvious one, the real one, smooth from age, heavy with intention. My father had once told me, if someone tries to force their way into something you've protected properly, let them. The mistake is part of the proof. Robert thought strength was about force. He thought entitlement could cut through steel. He thought the lock was the barrier. He never understood that the storage unit wasn't hiding value. It was hiding truth. And he had just walked straight into it. I didn't rush home after that call. That's the part people struggle to understand. They expect panic, anger, a desperate drive through the night. But panic is what people do when they're unprepared. I wasn't. I stayed where I was, sitting on the edge of my bunk, listening to the hum of the bass settling into evening routine, and I let myself think. Because this story didn't start with bolt cutters. It started years earlier, in the quiet months after my father died, when the house still smelled like his aftershave and old books, and every room felt slightly off balance, like a table missing one leg. My mother moved through those days on autopilot. I moved through them with purpose. Not because I was stronger, but because someone had to remember details. My father had always been a man of details. He kept receipts long after warranties expired. He labeled boxes with dates and contents. He believed that if you loved someone, you didn't leave them confusion, you left them clarity. The storage unit was his idea long before he ever got sick. He'd told me about it one evening while we were sitting on the back porch, the kind of conversation that feels casual until years later, when you realize it was a warning. Some things shouldn't live in the house, he'd said, not because they're shameful, because they're important. He never raised his voice when he said it, never looked at me for reaction, just stated it as fact. Inside that unit, he kept pieces of his life he didn't want scattered or misunderstood. Legal documents, yes, but also context, explanations, proof of intent. He believed that paperwork without narrative could be twisted by the wrong hands, so he left both. When he died, the lawyer handed me a slim envelope and said, "Your father asked me to give this to you only and only when you were alone." Inside was the key and a single page of instructions. No melodrama, no last wishes written in shaky ink. Just calm, deliberate sentences. Do not involve your mother unless you must. If someone asks about the unit, note the question. If someone tries to access it without you, let them reveal themselves. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. I thought grief had made him pessimistic. I didn't understand yet how clearly he saw people. My mother met Robert less than a year later. He worked in consulting, which seemed to mean he talked a lot and explained very little. He was attentive in a way that impressed neighbors, opening doors, carrying groceries, asking my mother if she was warm enough. When I met him in person for the first time, he shook my hand firmly and told me he respected the discipline of military life. "You must be very organized," he said, smiling. "Your father was too." It wasn't a compliment, it was a probe. The questions followed quickly after that. How long had my parents owned the house? Was it paid off? Did my father have retirement accounts? Life insurance? He asked these things with my mother sitting right there, laughing it off, saying things like, "Robert worries too much." But worry doesn't have a direction. His did. I started noticing patterns. Robert would ask a question, then circle back to it weeks later, phrased differently. He'd repeat details my mother hadn't volunteered. He remembered numbers, dates, addresses. And when he talked about my father, it was always in the past tense, but his eyes stayed fixed on the future. From the base, I listened carefully when my mother called. I learned to hear what wasn't said. The pauses before she answered. The way she'd lower her voice without realizing it. The way Robert's opinions slowly became facts in her sentences. He thinks it would be simpler if everything was in one place, she told me once, just for emergencies. Emergencies were always his excuse. I asked her what he meant by everything. She hesitated, then said, "You know, accounts papers, that storage unit your dad had. He doesn't understand why you still keep it." That was the first time he named it outright. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself, I just said Dad asked me to handle it, and I am. Robert didn't like that. After that, his tone toward me shifted. Not openly hostile, never that obvious, but edged with implication. He suggested I was hiding things. That military life had made me distant, that I didn't trust my own family. And that was when I knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't trying to access the storage unit yet. He was trying to isolate the narrative around it, to make my mother question my motives, to make her feel uncomfortable with my authority over something he wanted control of. So I did what my father would have done. I documented. I kept a private log stored digitally and backed up twice. I noted dates, exact wording changes in behavior. I saved text messages where Robert framed financial access as concern, emails where he suggested consolidating unused property. I didn't react emotionally. I treated it like intelligence gathering. Robert escalated slowly. He offered to help with paperwork, asked if my father had left instructions about the storage unit, suggested that since he was now my mother's husband, it might make sense for him to manage certain things on her behalf. I refused every time. Not loudly, not dramatically, just consistently. And consistency frustrates people like Robert, because it leaves no opening. The day he finally went to the storage facility himself, I wasn't surprised. I'd been waiting for it. I'd already prepared Thomas the manager months earlier. I'd already updated the access restrictions. I'd already confirmed local laws regarding property rights and spousal claims. Robert thought marriage had given him a shortcut. What he didn't realize was that my father had anticipated exactly that assumption. As I sat on my bunk phone resting in my palm after Thomas's call, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not fear, not anger. Relief. Because when someone shows up with bolt cutters, they stop pretending. They stop framing greed as responsibility. They stop hiding behind concern. They reveal themselves. And my father had built everything around that moment. I slid the key back into its place and made a call of my own. Not to my mother, not to Robert. To the lawyer. "Something's happening," I said, "and I think we're exactly where my father expected us to be." I didn't tell my mother what was happening at the storage facility that day, not yet. That restraint wasn't cruelty, it was strategy. By then I understood something my father had tried to teach me without ever putting it into words. When someone is being manipulated, the truth has to arrive in the right order, or it gets rejected on impact. My mother was still inside the story Robert had written for her. In his version, he was the responsible husband, the one cleaning up loose ends, the one making sure nothing important was being hidden from her. And I was the distant daughter, too rigid from military life, too secretive, too controlling of things that should have belonged to the family now. He'd been planting those ideas for months. I heard it in my mother's voice when she called me later that evening. She sounded tired, careful, like she was choosing each word after consulting someone standing just out of frame. "Robert said you were upset about the storage unit," she began. I let the silence stretch for a moment before answering. "What did he say I was upset about?" She hesitated. "He thinks you don't trust him. He said you wouldn't even let him check on your father's things, that it feels excluding." Excluding. That was his favorite word lately. "I'm not upset," I said calmly. "And I'm not excluding anyone. Dad asked me to handle that unit, and I am." "But he's my husband now," she said softly. "He worries about me." There it was. The pivot. Concern reframed as entitlement. I could almost hear Robert in the background nodding along, satisfied that the seed had taken root. "I know he worries," I said, "but worrying doesn't create ownership." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was defensive. "Why are you being so cold about this?" I closed my eyes. This was the moment I had been waiting to avoid. Because if I pushed now, if I told her about the bolt cutters, the attempted break-in, the legal restrictions, Robert would twist it instantly. He'd say I was exaggerating, overreacting. that I'd misunderstood his intentions. So I didn't push. "I'm not being cold," I said. "I'm being careful." She sighed, and I heard the distance settle in. "You've changed," she said, "since the service." That one hurt more than I expected. Not because it was true, but because it wasn't hers. After we hung up, I added the call to my log. Date, time, exact phrasing. I noted how quickly Robert had turned a failed break-in into a story about my lack of trust. How efficiently he'd made himself the wounded party. This was the pattern my father had warned me about. Isolation never starts with distance, it starts with doubt. Over the next week, Robert escalated. Not openly, not in ways that would alarm anyone outside the house. He did it in small, cumulative moves. He began answering my mother's phone for her. He suggested she stop forwarding me mail until everything was sorted. He told her it might be best if she didn't mention finances to me anymore since it upset me. Each time my mother complied a little more, not because she agreed, but because resisting him required energy she didn't have. Grief had already taken so much from her. Robert was offering simplicity, a single voice, a single plan. That's how control works when it's done well. From the outside, it looks like partnership. From the inside, it feels like relief. I watched it happen from a distance, documenting everything, waiting for the moment when denial would no longer be possible. That moment came sooner than Robert expected. The facility sent me the security footage. I watched it alone late at night, seated at the small desk in my quarters. The screen showed Robert arriving in the early afternoon, dressed neatly, carrying a tool bag. He didn't look nervous. He looked entitled. He spoke to Thomas for nearly 5 minutes. Even without audio, I could tell what he was saying. His gestures were confident, dismissive. He pointed toward the unit as if it already belonged to him. Then came the bolt cutters. I watched his posture change when Thomas refused him. The way his shoulders tightened, the way he leaned in, the way he gestured sharply toward the lock. There was no confusion on his face, no surprise. Only irritation. That footage mattered more than he realized. Because irritation isn't concern, it's frustration at an obstacle. I forwarded the file to the lawyer along with my log, the messages, the timeline, everything I'd been quietly assembling. Her response came back quickly. "This is escalation," she wrote. "And it's clumsy. He's acting as if marriage grants him rights it does not." She was right, and that clumsiness was new. People like Robert are careful until they feel entitled. Then they rush. I knew what came next. He would push harder. He would press my mother for access. He would frame me as the enemy more aggressively. He would try to force a decision before I could act. So I made my move. I requested emergency leave. Not because I needed to be home, but because my presence would change the dynamic. Robert had built his story around my absence, around the idea that I was far away, unreachable abstract. He needed me to stay distant. I packed lightly, uniform pressed, documents secured. The key stayed where it always had, hidden, silent patient. Before I boarded the flight, I called Thomas. "He'll come back," I told him. Thomas didn't hesitate. "I figured as much," he said. "Men like that don't stop after one no." "No," I agreed, "they escalate." As the plane lifted off, I stared out the window at the lights shrinking below me. I thought about my father, about the way he'd planned for this without ever naming it, about how much trust he'd placed in my ability to wait. Robert thought time was on his side. He thought pressure would break me. What he didn't understand was that every step he took, every lie, every attempt, every manipulation was narrowing his options. And I was letting him. Because when the truth finally arrived, it wouldn't come as an argument. It would come as evidence. I landed just after dawn. The city looked the same from the airport shuttle window, gray sidewalks, blinking traffic lights. People already late for something, but I felt different moving through it. Grounded, focused. Like every step I took was part of a route I'd memorized years ago without realizing it. I didn't go home first. I went straight to the storage facility. Thomas was waiting for me in the small office near the front, a paper cup of coffee cooling in his hands. He stood when he saw me, relief plain on his face. "I'm glad you came," he said. "He's been back twice." That didn't surprise me. "How did he act?" I asked. Thomas let out a slow breath. Calmer, which worried me more. He didn't bring tools this time. He brought paperwork. That got my attention. He said his wife had the right to whatever was in the unit now, Thomas continued. Said he was just trying to prevent family assets from being mishandled. He wanted me to override the access restriction. And when you didn't? Thomas's mouth tightened. He smiled, said he understood, then asked what time I got off work. I nodded. That fit. People like Robert always switch tactics when force fails. They soften, they wait, they look for cracks. Did he say anything else, I asked. Thomas slid a printed still from the security footage across the desk. It showed Robert standing in front of my unit, head tilted slightly as if listening. He said something that stuck with me, Thomas said. He told me, locks don't protect what belongs to me, they just delay it. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my bag. Another piece. Another brick. Thank you, I said. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. Thomas nodded, then hesitated. You know, he said, lowering his voice, I've worked here a long time. People try to get into units that aren't theirs all the time, but they usually panic, or bluff, or threaten. What did he do? He acted like the outcome was already decided. I understood that perfectly. I didn't open the unit that morning, not yet. That wasn't the move. Instead, I drove home. The house looked unchanged from the outside. Same porch light. Same rose bush my father planted years ago. But the atmosphere shifted the moment I stepped inside. The air felt tight, controlled. Robert was sitting at the kitchen table with my mother when I walked in. He stood immediately surprise flashing across his face before he masked it with a smile. Well, he said, spreading his hands, look who's home. My mother rose more slowly. Her eyes searched my face, relief and apprehension tangled together. You didn't tell me you were coming, she said. I wanted to see you, I replied, in person. Robert pulled out a chair. Sit, he said, like he was doing me a favor. We were just talking about you. I'm sure I said, remaining standing. He cleared his throat. There's been some confusion. About your father's things. About the storage unit. There hasn't, I said calmly. My mother frowned. Robert says the manager wouldn't let him check on it. That he was treated like a stranger. That's because he is, I said. The word landed harder than I intended. My mother flinched. Robert's smile thinned. You don't get to decide that, he said lightly. I'm your mother's husband. And I'm my father's daughter, I replied. And he put the unit in my name. Robert leaned back, crossing his arms. Marriage changes things. Not legally, I said. My mother looked between us. Why are you both acting like this? She asked. Why is this unit such a problem? I took a breath. This was the edge of the moment my father warned me about, the point where truth could either clarify or collapse. Because I said gently, someone tried to break into it. The room went very still. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. What? Robert's reaction was faster. That's ridiculous, he said. Who told you that? The manager, I replied. And the security footage. He laughed sharply. So now you're accusing me of what, being a criminal? I'm stating facts, I said. You showed up with bolt cutters. My mother turned to him. Robert. He stood his chair, scraping against the floor. I went there to protect what belongs to us, he snapped. And I didn't bring anything to break in. That's a lie. I pulled my phone from my pocket and set it on the table. The still image stared up at us, him mid-motion, tool bag open, bolt cutters visible. My mother stared at the screen, her face drained of color. That's you, she whispered. Robert didn't look at her. He looked at me. And for the first time there was no charm in his eyes, only calculation. You think this gives you power, he said quietly. You think holding on to old junk makes you important. It's not junk, I said, and it's not about power. Then what is it about, he demanded. I met his gaze without flinching. Control. He scoffed. You're projecting. You've always needed to be in charge. Military life did that to you. Enough, my mother said suddenly. Her voice shook. Enough, Robert. He turned to her, stunned. You're taking her side. I'm asking you to explain why you lied, she said. Why you went behind my back. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I was trying to help. By cutting a lock, she asked. Silence stretched. I watched something fracture in her expression, not fully, not yet, but enough. Doubt had entered. Real doubt. The kind that doesn't go away when someone reassures you. "I'm going to the storage unit," I said. "Today. And you are not coming." Robert stepped toward me. "You can't stop me." I smiled slightly. I already have. He stared at me, jaw clenched, and in that moment I knew he understood. He'd lost the narrative, the secrecy, the advantage of acting unseen. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the ground had shifted. As I picked up my bag, my mother's voice followed me. "What's in that unit?" she asked. I paused at the door. "The truth," I said, "and you deserve to see it when it's safe." Behind me, Robert said nothing. And that silence told me everything I needed to know about what he would do next. I went back to the storage facility alone. That was deliberate. If Robert followed, I wanted it documented. If my mother insisted on coming, I wanted her safe at home, away from whatever reaction this might provoke. Truth has weight, and I needed space to lift it properly before I set it down in front of anyone else. Thomas buzzed me in without a word. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The look on his face told me he understood this was no longer just about a lock. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and cold metal. Every footstep echoed steady and controlled. I stopped in front of the unit and stood there for a moment, my hand hovering near the lock. I thought of my father, of how he used to pause before opening doors, not out of hesitation but respect, like every threshold deserved acknowledgement. Then I turned the key. The door rolled up smoothly, quietly, revealing exactly what it always had, a neat, unremarkable space filled with boxes labeled in my father's handwriting. Winter coats, books, old tools, a cracked picture frame wrapped in brown paper. Anyone else would have seen clutter, evidence of a life downsized and forgotten. That's what Robert saw. But I knew the order of this place the way some people know prayer. I stepped inside and moved straight to the back wall, sliding aside 2 boxes marked Garage Miscellaneous and Tax Files Old. Beneath them was the metal cabinet bolted to the concrete floor, matte gray and unassuming. My father had once joked that it looked like something no one would bother stealing. He was right. I unlocked it and pulled the contents out, carefully laying them on the small folding table I'd brought for this purpose. First came the documents. The trust paperwork executed years before my parents' marriage even began to strain. It outlined in plain language the separation of assets, my father's property, his accounts, his intent, clear, unambiguous, legally airtight. A clause specifically excluding future spouses from claims to anything held in trust. Robert had never known it existed. Next came the will, updated twice. The last time just 6 months before my father died. It referenced the trust, directly reinforced it, and named me as executor. Not because he didn't trust my mother, but because he knew exactly how grief could be exploited. Then came the life insurance policy. Beneficiary the trust. Not my mother, not a spouse, not anyone who could be persuaded or pressured into signing something they didn't understand. Robert had been hunting blind. And then there was the envelope. It was thicker than the rest, sealed with a strip of tape my father had pressed down carefully, as if even the act of closing it mattered. On the front, in his familiar script, he'd written, "If someone tries to take this from you, read this first." I sat down before opening it. Inside were letters, not many, just enough. The first was addressed to me. He wrote the way he spoke, plain, deliberate, without ornament. "You will know when someone is crossing a line because they will pretend it isn't there. They will call your boundaries selfish. They will tell others you are difficult so they don't have to be honest. If that happens, do not argue. Document. Wait. Let them reveal themselves." I swallowed hard and kept reading. The second letter was addressed to my mother. It was gentler, softer. He wrote about love, about how loneliness can distort trust. He wrote about how wanting companionship doesn't make someone weak, but ignoring red flags doesn't make them kind either. He asked me if the time ever came to show her this letter, only when she was ready to see it. The third letter was shorter and colder. It wasn't addressed to anyone by name. It listed dates, conversations, small financial decisions my father had noticed Robert asking about even before they were married, requests framed as help, questions framed as curiosity, patterns that only become obvious when you line them up. My father had been documenting too. I sat there for a long time surrounded by his quiet foresight, feeling the weight of it settle into place. This wasn't just protection, it was patience written down. I took photos of everything, scanned the documents, uploaded them to a secure drive. Then I repacked the cabinet exactly as it had been, except for one thing. I removed the letters. Those were coming home with me. As I rolled the door back down and locked the unit, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Robert says you're trying to turn me against him." I didn't answer right away. Then another message followed. "He says you showed the manager fake footage. He says you're hiding money." There it was, the pivot, the last attempt to regain control of the story. I typed slowly. "I'm not hiding anything. I'm bringing the truth home tonight." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "What truth?" "The kind that doesn't need to be forced," I wrote, "and the kind that explains why he needed bolt cutters." I drove home as the sun dropped lower, the city shifting into evening. When I pulled into the driveway, Robert's car was already there. He was waiting. I could see him through the front window pacing, talking on the phone, gesturing sharply. The calm mask he'd worn for months was gone. Good. Because when people lose their masks, they stop pretending. And pretending had been the only thing keeping him in the house. I parked, grabbed the envelope from my bag, and stepped out of the car. Whatever happened next, I was done waiting. Robert opened the door before I could reach it. He didn't greet me, didn't pretend. The anger was right there on his face, raw and impatient, like he'd finally decided the polite version of himself was no longer necessary. "We need to talk," he said. "I know," I replied, stepping past him into the house. My mother stood near the living room window, arms folded tightly across her chest. She looked smaller than I remembered. Tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. When she saw the envelope in my hand, her eyes flickered with recognition and fear. "What is that?" she asked. "Something Dad left," I said gently, "for both of us." Robert laughed sharply. More secrets. I set my bag down on the coffee table and turned to face him. "You don't get to frame this as secrecy anymore." He scoffed. "You think a few papers give you authority over this family?" "No," I said. "They give me evidence." That word landed differently. He felt it. I saw the calculation return to his eyes the way it always did when he thought there might still be a way to pivot. My mother stepped closer. "Robert," she said quietly, "I need you to listen." He didn't look at her. "She's manipulating you," he said. "That's what she's been doing from the start. She doesn't trust anyone. She never has." I opened the envelope and took out the first letter, the one addressed to my mother. I didn't hand it to her yet. I just held it up so she could see her name written in my father's handwriting. "She deserves to hear this," I said. Robert lunged forward. "That's private." "So was the storage unit," I replied. He stopped. Not because he'd been convinced, but because he'd been caught. My mother took the letter with trembling hands and sat down. She read silently at first. Then her lips began to move, tracing the words. Her breathing changed, deepened, slowed. When she reached the end, she pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. He knew, she whispered. Robert turned to her sharply. "Knew what?" "That I might be lonely," she said. "That I might want someone so badly I'd stop asking questions." He shook his head. "This is ridiculous. He's gone. He doesn't get to control our lives from beyond the grave." "He's not controlling anything," I said. "He's explaining." I laid the trust documents out on the table one by one, clear headings, dates, signatures. I watched Robert's face as he scanned them. The confidence drained from his posture with every page. "This is fake," he said finally. "It's been filed for years," I replied. "Verified, recorded, reviewed." My mother looked up at him. "You told me there was no trust." "I told you what you needed to hear," he snapped. The silence that followed was thick and final. I placed the last item on the table, the still image from the security footage. Robert standing in front of the unit. Bolt cutters visible. Intent unmistakable. My mother stared at it for a long time. "You went behind my back," she said. "I was protecting us," he insisted. "She was hiding things. I did what I had to do." "No," she said, standing now. "You did what you wanted." He rounded on me. "This is your fault. You pushed me into this." I didn't raise my voice. "No, you escalated because you thought time would force compliance." He took a step toward me. You think you've won? I met his gaze steadily. I think you've run out of moves. That was when the doorbell rang. Robert froze. I walked to the door and opened it. The officer on the porch nodded politely. Behind him stood Thomas. Ma'am, the officer said we received a report regarding an attempted forced entry at a commercial storage facility. Robert's mouth opened, closed. This is a misunderstanding, he said, quickly stepping forward. Family matter. The officer's eyes flicked to Thomas, who shook his head. We have video, Thomas said, and prior notice that this individual was not authorized. The officer turned back to Robert. Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside. My mother's voice cut through the room. Robert, do it. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, not as an ally, not as leverage, as an obstacle. This isn't over, he said to me as he passed. I didn't respond. Outside, the officer spoke quietly. Robert's protests rose, then softened, then sharpened again. I watched from the doorway as the dynamic shifted, control replaced by compliance. When it was over, the officer returned my ID and nodded. You did the right thing, he said. After they left, the house felt hollow, quieter than it had in months. My mother sat down slowly. I didn't want to see it, she said, but I do now. I sat beside her. I know. She reached for my hand. Thank you for waiting. I squeezed her fingers. Dad asked me to. Outside, Robert's car was gone. Inside, the truth finally had room to breathe. The house felt different the next morning. Not quiet or just honest. Sunlight moved across the kitchen table where the papers had been laid out the night before. My mother sat there with a cup of tea she hadn't touched, staring at the trust documents, like they might rearrange themselves if she looked long enough. She looked older in the daylight, not weaker, clearer, as if something heavy had finally been set down. I keep thinking about all the moments I ignored, she said softly. The little things. That's how it works, I replied. No one walks into a trap they can see. She nodded. He always said he was just trying to help, that he didn't want me to worry. I didn't say what I was thinking, that worry had been his tool, not her burden. She'd get there on her own. Healing doesn't happen on a schedule. We spent the morning doing practical things, changing passwords, calling the bank, freezing accounts Robert had accessed under the guise of convenience. The lawyer joined by phone, calm and precise, explaining next steps in language that cut through confusion without adding fear. A restraining order would be filed, a formal notice delivered. Nothing dramatic, just boundaries with teeth. When it was done, my mother exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. Will he come back, she asked. He might try, I said honestly, but he won't get far. She studied me for a moment. Your father trusted you with all of this. He trusted the plan, I replied, and he trusted that you'd be ready to see it when it mattered. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I wish I'd listened sooner. I reached for the envelope, the last letter my father had written for her, the one she'd already read but hadn't yet kept. I slid it across the table. He wrote this for the moment you stopped apologizing for wanting peace, I said. Not for choosing him, for choosing yourself. She pressed the letter flat with her palm, steadying it, steadying herself. I forgot what it felt like to have choices, she whispered. In the afternoon, we went back to the storage unit together. Not because we needed anything from it, but because it was time. Thomas greeted us with the same quiet professionalism he'd shown from the beginning. He didn't ask questions. He just unlocked the gate and stepped aside. When my mother saw the unit, really saw it not as a burden, not as a secret, but as a space my father had built to hold context, she stopped. Oh, she said, this is him. I nodded. We rolled the door up and stood there for a while, letting the smell of dust and old paper settle around us. She touched a box labeled in my father's handwriting and smiled through tears. I thought he was letting go, she said. I didn't realize he was organizing. I opened the metal cabinet and showed her what remained, the documents, now familiar, the order intentional. No drama, no surprise, just clarity. This isn't about money, she said slowly. It never was. No, I agreed. It's about consent. We spent an hour sorting through the outer boxes, things that could finally come home. Books he'd loved. A coat she remembered buying him. A cracked frame with a photograph from a summer that felt impossibly far away. When we finished, the unit felt lighter, not emptied but resolved. That evening, my mother cooked dinner for the first time in weeks. Nothing elaborate. Soup and bread. We ate at the table without talking much, the kind of silence that doesn't demand explanation. Afterward, she stood at the sink and said something that surprised me. I don't think I want to rush into replacing anything she said, not the house, not my life. I smiled. You don't have to replace it, you just have to own it. She turned, drying her hands. You learned that somewhere. I learned it watching you, I said, and Dad. Later, as I packed to return to base, she lingered in the doorway. I didn't understand your silence, she said. I thought it meant distance. Sometimes it means preparation, I replied. She nodded, then hugged me tight, unguarded, the way she hadn't in years. Thank you for protecting me, she said, even when I didn't know I needed it. On the drive to the airport the next morning, my phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number, just 3 words. You'll regret this. I didn't reply. I blocked it, logged it, and kept driving. Because regret belongs to people who act without thinking. I had done the opposite. My father once told me that revenge is loud and short-lived, but boundaries are quiet and permanent. What I did wasn't revenge. It was restoration, of truth, of agency, of a future that couldn't be cut open with bolt cutters. If you're listening to this, and something about it feels familiar, if you've ever watched someone you love slowly lose their voice while someone else spoke for them, I want you to know this. You're not imagining it. And you're not wrong to protect what matters. I'd like to know, have you ever had to stay silent to prepare for the right moment? Would you have done what I did? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. We share stories like this every day, stories about patience, protection, and finding your way back to yourself. If you don't want to miss the next one, subscribe and stay with us. Let's keep going together.